Hi all. Just thought I'd just give you a few tips and hints of how to do a pretty good IA, micro IA, and I thought I would show you a pretty good one that's come from the 2025 cohort. It's not perfect, but it's certainly up in that 7 zone, so you get a feel of what is expected of us, or certainly what is expected of me. I think both Mr. Altoft and I have looked at this essay, and we both agree it's pretty solid. To begin with, we'll just go through the first few pages, which just looks at the actual article itself. Um, when you look at that article, what you can see on screen at the moment, what is good about it is that I can clearly see the title, I can see the author, and if I put the cursor over it, I can actually see the date of the publication. So I prefer that I do see that. There should also be the link or the source to the article. This particular student has it at the end of the article, but this is what we should be seeing here, the author, the date, and the link to the article. As I scroll through, you can see what's highlighted in yellow are the things that this student actually talks about in the commentary, the analysis and evaluation. Now you'll note that it's full sentences that are underlined or highlighted, or you'll see complete paragraphs. So it is not advisable to just kind of highlight a few keywords or one line. There is an expectation from the IB examiners moderators that you actually highlight the complete sentences used, or as we scroll through these first few pages, you can actually see a whole paragraph which is highlighted, which I suspect is what this student actually talks about in his essay. Okay, so you can see that it's done properly, in the sense that it's not just a patchy, a few words here and there and a sentence. It's complete sentences, or a significant part of a paragraph, or even a paragraph if required. Okay, and there you can see the link to the actual article, but I prefer that up the top near the title, as I stated earlier. Okay, I'll stop there for the time being before I get myself ready to actually talk about the commentary. Okay, returning back to commentary itself, I think I'll go through page by page, so you get a feel of what we're after. First off, presentation really stands out. I can clearly see the page numbers. They're at the top. They're in the middle of the page. The font size is 12. The font style is consistent, and the line spacing is 1.5. I think 1.5 is ideal. It makes it easy to read. It looks nice. And the other thing is that you can see that the sides are even, which is what we call justify. Um, that's my preference. I mean, it's not true of every teacher, but certainly the font size of 12, the line spacing of 1.5, and a consistent use of a particular font style. That might be Arial, Calibri, or Times Roman. One of those three is good, but whichever one you use, just be consistent. And as I said, the 1.5 looks great, and the sides of the essay look even, and it just makes it look neat and tidy and professional. The introduction is this particular one is probably in that sweet spot. You can see it's about 10 lines. I wouldn't be pushing it more than 100 words, because you don't actually get marks for the introduction, but you certainly do set the tone, and you can tell, with the introduction, whether or not the IA is going to be particularly good, and I skim read this and I know it's going to be particularly good. The thing that stands out, I mean, you can clearly see that this particular person is using quotes. The quotes are in italics, and I mean, all the quotes do is they play a supportive role in providing evidence to back up any claims or arguments or evaluation that's being done in the essay. So it's good to do. Put them in italics. There's probably a little bit too many. Our thinking around this space has certainly changed in the last 6 months, based on some of the feedback that we received from the IB. So what is ideal? I think probably 2 quotes per paragraph, and there should be essentially quotes in every paragraph. But they should just be a short phrase. Like, we shouldn't see sentences, and certainly no complete sentences where you have lifted straight from the article, because the external examiners or moderators, if they see too many quotes, basically believe you're just being descriptive and you're allowing the article to do all the work for you. So it's really a Goldilocks situation. Not too many, not too little, and I think the sweet spot is 2, maybe 3 very short phrases in those meaningful paragraph or consequential paragraphs. What I like is towards the end of the introduction, it is very clear that this particular person has justified the use of the key concept of intervention. Whenever you use the key concept in your essay, especially when you're explaining it and establishing the link to the article, because it's about explaining the link, that's what gets you to 3 points. You should put it in bold. So let's read it through. The conceptual lens of intervention will be used to analyse and evaluate the effectiveness of the tax to meet its objectives in eliminating market failure and improving the health in Colombia there. Okay, that's what intervention says in the subject guide. It's you step in to achieve certain objectives. So this student has clearly identified what the purpose of the intervention is, and as you'll see and you'll read through it, he does keep coming back to that. So that just makes it nice and consistent, bookends it at the start and at the finish of the document. So you really need to justify why the key concept that you've selected is appropriate or relevant in writing a commentary on the particular article that you've selected. It's probably important to put any key assumptions you're going to make, and typically I would do that at the start, just after the introduction, because that's one of the class factors. You can go back later on in the essay and actually challenge your own assumption. But he makes it very clear here that for ease of analysis, or for ease of exposition, which is a phraseology you should use, he's assumed that the demand for ultra-processed foods is inelastic due to their addictive nature. That's one of the key evaluation points. Okay, so for most of you doing the market failure, elasticity is relevant, and it's a concept that you really need to fully explore. So it doesn't hurt putting the assumption up front and then later on talking about it, or maybe even easing it and challenging it. If that is the case, and that changes the aspect of your evaluation. Let's look at the diagram. Okay, it's just about the right size. It should occupy about 1/3 of your page. That just looks aesthetically nice. I always think on that first page, you should see the intro, the diagram, and then most of the explanation of that first diagram. All right. In the case of Microeconomics IA, the first diagram is always about the problem that's being encountered. So in this instance, it's the negative externalities associated with the overconsumption of ultra-processed foods. There is full labelling. Just some of the drafts that I've marked, there isn't full labelling. What I mean by full labelling is that it's customised or contextualised to the actual article, but also the units of measurement for both axes are present. So this is in Colombian pesos on the vertical axis, the price, the costs and benefits. And then on the horizontal axis, it is the quantity of ultra-processed foods in units. Like, it could be tonnes, it could be litres, it could be boxes, whatever it is, but the units of measurement should be there. Okay, keep those titles short. Pre-tax market for ultra-processed foods in Colombia. Some people write more than 10 words. They can't be more than 10 words. Just keep it sweet and short. It is just the market in most cases that you're looking at, pre and post. So keep it simple. Right, the explanation. I suggest that whenever you talk about a particular point on the diagram, you should put it in bold so it sticks out, and then the examiner can quickly cross-check to see that the explanation matches up with the diagram. Okay, first thing you should do, or very early on in explaining that diagram, and it's got to be a full explanation, you actually got to tell us what the externality is. Okay, so in this case you can clearly see what the externality is. It's the overconsumption of salt, and that leads to things like hypertension and pre-hypertension, or possibly diabetes. So you can read through that. We'll just scroll into page 5. Okay, so negative externalities burden society through higher healthcare costs and lower productivity. All right, so at the equilibrium, there's a clear discussion that the MPB is greater than the MSB. And what I like about this is this phrase here. Okay, as consumers ignore the external cost of the consumption. I think that's really important to say. Because the market equilibrium, whether it's a negative or positive externality, or whether it comes in consumption or production, people might be aware it does create an externality, but generally speaking, as part of the market transaction, they ignore it. Okay. Then you can go on. The student goes on, this leads to a loss of economic welfare and is represented by area A, so that matches up with the dead weight loss represented in the diagram. Then you've also got allocative efficiency occurs, good use of phrase. Allocative efficiency or allocative inefficiency should be there. There's a mention of what the social optimum is, okay, where MSB equals MSC. Currently, the equilibrium quantity or the market quantity is greater than the social optimum quantity, and that indicates the overconsumption, right? And then again, what I like about it, at the end of that first paragraph, this is the first meaningful paragraph, there is that link established between the key concept and the article. This overconsumption provides justification for the government to intervene to correct a market failure which reduces the dead weight loss and improves health outcomes. See how this student has kept it consistent with the last thing they said in the introduction. The objective of the intervention is to improve efficiency and improve health outcomes. So there's that link there between the purpose of the intervention and the outcome. So I really like that. It's very polished. I'll take another pause here before I go into that second diagram. Okay, returning back to the commentary, looking now at page 5, the second page, looking at the second diagram. Typically with the Microeconomics IA, the second diagram should be the solution that is talked about in the article. And basically what you should be saying here in the paragraph which comes after the second diagram is how the solution should work. Okay, so whether it's a market-based solution or an example of direct regulation or an educational campaign, whatever the solution is that's being addressed in the article, the second diagram, the focus should be how it actually should work in theory, without being overly generic and being too theoretical in your discussion. Again, I look at this diagram, title's good, the labelling on the axes are full. I can see that the welfare loss will be less so than what it was prior to the introduction of the tax. You can see here there's some application, some clear application of numbers. So if there's data or prices that you can easily transcribe to the diagram, I would do that because that convinces the moderator or the external examiner that you are applying the stuff from the article to your diagram, so it's customizing the diagram. Like this, because obviously he is going to talk a lot more about the burden that falls upon consumers and producers based on elasticity. So you could do that, whether you just show it as government revenue or you show it as consumer and producer burden, it doesn't really matter, but that's a nice touch. It's an ad valorem tax, which means it's a percentage of price, it's not per unit. So that's consistent there with the article. Again, yeah, the different shades indicates that the dead weight loss won't be eliminated by the tax, but it will be, I guess, reduced by the introduction of the tax. So let's have a read through it. Okay, so government intervenes in the market through an ad valorem tax, which is a tax levied as a percentage of price. So, the student is displaying an understanding of that word or that term, which is lovely to see. So they're kind of defining it without actually defining it, which is good. Then straight away, the whole point of a tax is discussed, to internalise the negative externality by making a part of the transaction. I really like that sentence because it's saying, firstly, taxes try to internalise the negative externality by making it a part of a transaction that both consumers and producers need to be aware of, and now in this case it will be the consumers. Next sentence refers to cost of production. Whether you're talking about a tax or subsidy as a market-based instrument to alleviate an externality, you must make a connection to the cost of production. Okay, so whether it's an increase or decrease in the cost of production, depending upon a tax or subsidy, you need to have the cost of production very early on in that paragraph that explains the second diagram. Now that leads to the shift in supply. Okay, potting. So the student again is referring back to the actual diagram, points on the diagram, and tells you where the new equilibrium is. Now, as a result, it really gets to the key stakeholders. The price that consumers pay increases from P0 to PC. Okay, so I can clearly see that the consumer is going to be worse off. At the same time, producers will try to pass on the tax to the consumers. But also, once the producer has to pay the tax to the government, they actually end up receiving a lot less than what they did before prior to the tax. Then at Q star, the welfare loss will be lower, represented by the darker shaded triangle. Given the government plans to gradually raise the tax to 20% by 2025, this suggests that the intervention is only partially effective. That's really good. That's a really good statement, because they're justifying why it's only partially solving the problem based on the evidence in the article. So the government knows that the tax is probably a bit too low and there's an intention to increase it in the future. So they already know it's probably not set at the optimal level initially. So I really like the use of evidence there to back up their statement. And again, there's that scope or the link to the key concept at the end of that paragraph. So, whether you put it at the end of the paragraph or at the start or in the middle, in those consequential paragraphs, which are the big explaining paragraphs, there should be a link to the key concept, which then links back to the article. So, that's what impresses me about it. It's not perfect, but it's a really good, solid paragraph, and it's getting that to that 10 to 12 lines, which is what is needed for a full explanation of a diagram. Anywhere between 10 to 14 lines. If it's less than 10, it's not enough to warrant a full explanation. And if you go 14 or more lines, you're really chewing up your word count, which means you're going to have less words to, talk about your evaluation on the final page. In terms of diagrams, some possible improvements. There could have been some dynamic arrows placed on the sides here just to show changes in prices or quantities. So, that's what I mean. It's a very good essay, but it's not perfect. Not that you would lose marks by not having arrows, but it's one thing that we look at to know that it's a really schmick essay body, the inclusion of dynamic arrows to show the change in the variables, right? Something that concerns me that I picked up in the drafts, whether it's got to do with the first or second diagram, maybe I'll just quickly go back to the first diagram. People mix up the use of the word shift and change. The only thing that shifts are the curves. Prices and outputs and equilibriums do not shift, they change. Now, if you get those mixed up and you get a hard-ass marker, as an external marker, they could honestly take a few marks off you because it's confused. Remember, one of the first things we teach you in demand and supply is that the non-price parameters shift curves, whereas changes in the independent variable like price changes quantities and will change your equilibrium point. So please do not get confused. I had to pull up a few people on the current drafts that I marked. So when you're talking around your explanation of the first and second diagram, do not get the term shift and change mixed up. Shift only refers to when those actual curves are shifted. If the price changes or output changes or your equilibrium point changes, then you do use the word change, not shift, right? Big no-no to use shift in those circumstances. Okay, I will take another pause here and get my thoughts together for the final page, which is a page which is on evaluation. So we'll have a break there for a couple of minutes. Okay, coming back to the final page, the third page of a commentary. That's always, known as the, the evaluation part of the essay. I mean, you can do evaluation throughout, but generally most people will do the bulk of their evaluation on the final page. My preference, and I think I speak on behalf of the other teachers here, the IA is a really good instrumental tool to teach you the skills required in the final examination. And when it comes to evaluation, what generally scores well on paper 1, part B and part G on paper 2 is a sophisticated form of evaluation in the sense that you just don't have one paragraph which talks about the advantages of a policy and then a separate paragraph where you have talking about disadvantages. What typically does well if you take a TOC structure to the essay, and you'll learn more about this in TOC, but I'll quickly let you know what it means. I know we've talked about it in class, but the TOC structure is for every paragraph there should be a theme. And whatever that central theme of that paragraph should be, you start off with a claim, usually to be the beneficial or positive reason that policy has been introduced in terms of achieving its goal. And then once you've kind of done the teal structure of that claim, you follow it up with the counterclaim, so the opposite. If you can master the art of making the counterclaim a consequence of the claim, you're doing pretty well. So really what we want to see on that final page is probably 2, maybe 3 paragraphs, but every paragraph must have a theme, okay? And then you have a claim and counterclaim developed within each. Now, I guess looking at this particular paragraph, the first one there on page 6, To me, the theme is around elasticity and stakeholders. Okay, so he brings up the idea of elasticity, so talking about the inelastic demand. So obviously elasticity is going to have some impact on the effectiveness, because that's what you need to be doing on this final page. You are evaluating the effectiveness of the policy, in this instance, to meet its objective. Okay, now what is nice about it, and again I made this comment a number of times in the drafts of Just Smart, that the minute you talk about elasticity, you need to talk about proportional changes, because remember, elasticity is referring to relative changes, not absolute changes. What is also good is that in his explanation, he's potting. So wherever possible, even on the evaluation page, if you are talking about something that can be connected back to the diagram, I suggest you do it. And I certainly gave that feedback on a number of occasions with the batch I just marked. So you can see here, he's looking at the relative change in output, brought about the relative change in price. So, all right, I know he understands it, because, they've matched up the conceptual understanding of elasticity and its representation back on its graph. Good use of quotes, so contextualising the evaluation, it's all backed up, by saying here that, even though we're looking at another country, when Mexico introduced a similar tax, it initially didn't work well, so that kind of corresponds to that discussion that the student is having around elasticity, so that's nice to see. Again, another quote, you can see, look, they're not full sentences, they're just short little phrases, and you do the hard work. All the quote does is it backs up, it provides the evidence to support your analysis and evaluation. So whatever you say, whatever your analysis or evaluation is, the quote is strategically used just to support your point. It is the evidence, right? It is not the essay. If you overquote, the essay becomes descriptive, and the first thing the examiner says is, well, they haven't done the work. The article's done the work for them. This is not an especially good IA. So you've got to be really skillful at weaving the quotes in where it's relevant and supporting your claim or counterclaim. Again, towards the end, figure 2 shows the additional burden that the consumers face with the introduction of a tax, and refers to that consumer burden. And again, a link back to the key concept. So the intervention is likely to be more effective as demand for UPFs becomes more elastic, I guess in time, when people have the time to switch towards healthier substitutes. So again, establishes a link of the key concept to the article, which is what we want to see. Next page kind of focuses a little bit more on producers, okay, in particular small shopkeepers, who are probably going to feel this tax a lot more heavier than bigger producers. So that's nice. Again, contextualisation, it's not a theoretical piece. There's a nice balance between theory and context. So the evaluation points come from the article. You can see there that the smaller firms will, struggle with this type of intervention. Also, too, there are some dramas around, well, what things do get taxed and what things don't get taxed. Again, bringing up some unfairness or, a consequence that might diminish the effectiveness of the tax. And again, it's linked to the article, so it's not overly theoretical, which is lovely to see. And again, bit more evidence to back up that. Look, there's probably a few too many quotes here, but again, this was written prior to the advice that we received from the moderator at the end of 2024. So, we just have to let it go. But, don't overuse it. Like I said, the quotes are there to back up the arguments that are being made, whether they're evaluation arguments or just your analysis. And then finally, you've got your conclusion. Conclusion should be substantiated. And, I think my line about this. I always think when you do evaluation and when you look at the conclusion, firstly, you don't introduce anything new. It's just a quick summary of what you've covered earlier in the commentary or the essay. You play the role of judge. In a sense, you have presented both the case for and the case against, and you are making a judgment here about whether or not the intervention is effective or not effective in meeting its objective, right? So, depending upon the key concept that you use, you've got to make a grand statement about your key concept in the conclusion. But generally speaking, whether we do the macro or micro, in this case, the micro essay, but when you do the macro, and even when you do the global IA, something's changed, policy has changed. And really, part of what you're doing is, firstly, you're explaining to the examiner how the policy works, how it should work, but then you also evaluate the effectiveness of the policy. So clearly in the case of micro, in this particular instance, we're looking at a tax. The student is weighing up the case for and the case against and making a judgment. Now, when you read through it, in the short run, inelastic demand, low household incomes and higher business costs hamper the effectiveness of the tax in meeting its goals. In the longer term, the intervention may be more effective given the gradual approach taken in raising the tax. So it's probably a little bit short. It probably needs to be 6 lines. This is about 4.5. But, a judgment has been reached. And interestingly, they're saying, look, in the short term, it's not so effective given the circumstances in the context of this particular article, but has a more rosy view for the longer term, in time when the tax is raised a little bit more higher. So again, it's a nice conclusion because it kind of, it is grounded in the evidence that's in the article. There's a use of a short term and long term, which is indicating evaluation. As we saw earlier on in the bigger paragraphs on page 6, there are themes to every paragraph. There are claims and counterclaims. The concept of elasticity is explored thoroughly and linked back to the individual stakeholders who are either affected in a bad way or in a good way, generally in a difficult way. And it's all relatable back to, what this student read and what they highlighted in the article. So, it's a nice balance between theory and contextualisation. And, that's really what we're looking for. We don't want it too theoretical because it'll be generic. And in that case, you get, again, a tough marker. They will give you 1 out of 3 for criteria C, which is application analysis, and they may also give you 1 out of 3 for evaluation. So you've dropped 4 marks there. So instead of, getting maybe 12 or 13 out of 14, you might get a mark below 10. And what we try to achieve is that every student gets 12 out of 14 as a minimum for the 3 IAs. And then when you get your extra 3 marks, you would get a 7 on the portfolio. So, that's what you need to be aiming for. So little things like a lack of contextualization, contextualization rather, that you're not kind of fully integrating a real world example with the theory, you can lose quite significant marks. Little silly mistakes, around, terminology can cost you a mark or 2, depending on how severe. So you really need to be careful. But, like I said, this is a very good essay. It's in that 7 band. Not perfect, but I'll tell you what, for a first attempt, it's a pretty solid effort, and it displays um, things that we would like to see. Um, Again, it's specific to the key concept of intervention, and it's looking at attacks to correct a market failure. But it's a good little essay. Um, so hopefully you got something out of this clip. It gives you some ideas. Um, how to structure your response and what we're looking for, how it should look. It should look professional. This one does. Basically the student has taken on board the suggestions that we make as a team, and so that's going to get a good mark. Okay, thank you for listening. And obviously, if you have any further questions, see me or Mr. Scudder or Mr. Outhoff or even Mr. Keener. We're here to help, and Miss Ravel now. So yeah, please see the economics team if you have any further questions. Okay, everyone. Thanks a lot. Thanks for listening.